again in our second week in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe you had a chance this week to do some reading in this book yourself, and if you did, there's no doubt you were challenged by some of the observations that Solomon makes. And there is so much in this book and in this series that we could look at and examine, and so we've just kind of taken a really quick overview as we get prepared to go into our series on Isaiah next week in our Explore the Bible series. And I hope you'll join us for that. And if you come by the church or if you need a book, let's go ahead and get a Sunday school book so you'll have some material to work with and you'll be on understanding what lesson is coming next and what passages we're going to be reading from for the book of Isaiah. But today in Ecclesiastes, if you got your Bible, go ahead and open it up. We're going to look at chapters 5, 6, and 7. Of course, we can't cover those completely and in depth in the 20 to 25 minutes we're going to take here. But we can give some overviews on what Solomon is thinking and what is kind of driving his thought process here, and use that to challenge us and our thought processes that we're having in our own lives today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit two passages in chapter 5 and 6, one in chapter 5 and 2 in chapter 6. And these are passages that will simply say the allure of riches and the problems that accompany that. So the allure of riches and the problems that accompany that. And then we'll look very briefly at a reflection that Solomon makes in chapter 5. And then we're going to go on to this part of chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, what I've called the actuality. So you have the allure of riches first, and then you have the actuality. What is really happening in our lives? And so, we're not immune to a desire for wealth. We're not immune to a wish for more. In fact, the whole question of how much wealth is enough, the answer is usually just a little more. I don't know what you have, but usually our requirement is just a little bit more. So the first thing we're going to do is read a couple of verses, verses 8 through 11 in chapter 5 of the book of Ecclesiastes. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless, or as it would say, vanity. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners, except to feast their eyes on them? Solomon begins this portion of this discussion on wealth by pointing to the fact that if you see oppression happening, that generally that is coming through the oversight of the ultimate ruler. And this is an interesting observation for him to make. And essentially, he's kind of owning some blame here. But now, remember, the book of Ecclesiastes is seen as a group of essays or a group of addresses that Solomon would have made to potentially other kings and to other rulers. And so he's kind of pointing the finger at the kings and the rulers of his day, including himself, and he's saying, if you have a problem in an area, it's your problem. Now, we're not immune to this issue in our own lives today. Politicians in D.C. want to say, no, it's the problem in Georgia. The Georgia politicians want to say, no, it's a problem for Ware County or Pierce County or whatever. But Solomon ultimately says the people who are ultimately making the decisions, they're the ones that are forcing the issues down the road. And this is a good thing to keep in mind as we deal with our lives and we think through some of the things that we're experiencing ourselves. So then he dives into this issue of money. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. And so he points to the fact that riches are simply a propellant for more riches. See, most of us have this idea that if we get a certain amount of money that we'll just simply enjoy consuming what that money can give us. But Solomon points to the problem with that idea in verse 11 by saying this: as goods increase, so do those who consume them. The more you have, the more it's going to cost you. The more it costs you, the more you need more to maintain it. And what an observation here about riches. And so we see the first thing, the allure of wealth, the allure of money, and the idea that you're going to have enough is not true, because you're always going to want more. So let's turn over to chapter 6, and let's read two other cautions, or two other negatives, if you will, about wealth. And it's verses 1 through 3 if you're looking in your Bible, and it's verses 4 through 9. And so these are harsh verses. But Solomon is making observation of what he has seen in his life, and even to some degree what he has experienced. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing over their heart's desire. But God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. Wow. What a statement. What a challenge to the readers and the hearers who are participating with Solomon in this moment. And by the way, thousands of years later, what a challenge to us today. Solomon says this: one of the dangers of consuming wealth, or having wealth as a sign of prosperity or as a sign of success, is that there are people who gather wealth and then their lives are lost, and it's a calamity. And he says it literally is better off than they would have never been born. And what he is saying here is that there is no enjoyment in their wealth. They don't even get to enjoy what they've gathered together. And we're going to look at just a minute one of his charges, because here's the thing: we are wealthy to some degree. If you live in the United States of America, you are wealthy. And I know we get tired of hearing that, because we look around us and we always compare ourselves up. In other words, we say, well, I don't have what this person has, and I don't have what that person has. I'm not wealthy. You're wealthy. One of the things I've started telling my children, and I really firmly believe this, is if we're complaining, it's because our comparison is going the wrong direction. If we're complaining, it's because we're looking at the wrong group of friends. So if my children are complaining they don't have the newest phone, the newest this, they don't get to go to these places, they don't get to have these types of things, then my challenge to them is, you're looking at the wrong group of people, because you are wealthy. So if you're complaining about what you don't have, then you need to be looking at your friends who don't even have anywhere close to what you have. And this is Solomon's statement that there's a calamity because people are gathering in this wealth, which you and I are doing and have. He's like, and then they don't even get to enjoy it. And I think of the misery I see every day that I log into social media. I don't care if you're extreme right wing, extreme left wing, somewhere in the middle, praying things are just going to happen. Well, I don't care where you fit on the spectrum. There is so much misery on display. And the things that you and I, the social media is generated by us regular folks, the things that we are putting out there and the complaints that we are generating, man, this is proving true. Solomon's words are still true thousands of years later, that here we are, wealthy, and it's horrible because we can't even enjoy it. We don't enjoy it. It's being taken from us by calamity, by our own calamity, not outside of us, but our own choices. All right. The second thing he points to in this issue of wealth is not only does calamity take it from you, and I kind of jumped a little bit here ahead of myself, but lack of satisfaction. Look at verses 4 through 9. It comes without meaning, the wealth. It departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. I'm sorry, that's speaking of the child he was just speaking about. Verse 4, I wrote the wrong verse number here. Verse 5. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over but fails to enjoy his prosperity, do not all go to the same place. He's talking about death. Now listen to verse 7. Everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. What advantage have the wise over fools? What do the poor gain by knowing how to conduct themselves before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And so his challenge here is this, that as our wealth increases, so does our appetites. It's just a reality. The more we have, the more we want. In fact, I'll give you an illustration on this, and maybe some of you have experienced this in your own life, but I have in the past gone through these periods where I've tried to limit my sugar intake, whether that be carbs or refined sugar or whatever. And I have found that if I eat a lot of sugar at the end of the day, somewhere between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the evening, whether it's a lot of carbs or whether it's something like a dessert with refined sugar in it, that the next day my body craves sugar. More sugar, whether it's carbs or refined sugar, it doesn't matter. I wake up the next day and I want more. And this, by the way, it's a proven thing. You can go read some of the science behind it and how it works as our body is fueled and takes in things. And so Solomon is saying the more that we have, the greater our appetite is. We just want more and more and more. And so the challenge is, this is the danger of riches. And so the allure of riches is that it'll satisfy us. And Solomon says, no, it won't. No, it won't. He says, because it's endless advancement. You always want more. And then he says, and by the way, some of you are going to have riches and you're never going to get to enjoy it because you're going to have a calamitous life. Whether it's, your life ends in death before you're able to enjoy it, or whether it's taken from you, or whatever it is. Solomon's like, you don't even get to enjoy your riches. And then the third thing is, Solomon says there's no satisfaction in them because your appetite continues to change and continues to increase. And this is the reality of our lives. Now, he does go in verse, well, let me look at that verse, but it's in chapter 5, if you will, turn back to that. He does give us a little challenge there. And he says that, hey, there is a way around this. How do you deal with riches in your life? And so we're going to look at this kernel of truth, and then we're going to look at a greater length of what is happening in our lives and what we're doing and the choices that we're making. And so in chapter 5 and verse 18, and I actually wrote this, and it has a very similar verse in chapter 3 as well, but I kind of claimed this as one of my verses a few years back, and I think that it should challenge all of us. This is what I have observed to be good, chapter 5, verse 18, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days that God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and prosperity, someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. Now listen to this verse, verse 20. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. And I want you to understand what I think Solomon is saying there. He's not saying they don't think about their lives. He's saying they're not conniving and planning for more. In other words, what they have is what they are enjoying. And because they're enjoying it, that can be at any moment, at any place, and at any time. And these people are living in that. So turn and look at chapter 7, because here is a strong challenge for us. This is one of those passages like chapter 3 where Solomon, in chapter 3, let me read verse for you real quick. There's a time for everything, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to gather. And so this is a very similar passage in chapter 7 to that. He begins to make these comparisons. It's a back and forth. It's a really quick interchange. It's poetic because his desire here is to make us give some great reflection to this. And so I'm going to read it, chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. And then we're just going to really briefly hit some observations on it. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This, too, is meaningless. Extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Verses 1 through 6 are a little bit of that back and forth. And so I want us to take, and we're going to see 5 visual pictures that Solomon is creating for us there, okay? In verse 1, Solomon is saying this: your reputation is more valuable than recognition. Now think about that. Why does he say it like that? Well, who gets perfume? The esteemed guest gets perfume. The honored person gets the ointment. And so Solomon is saying this: a good name, to be known as a honest and upright person, is better than fine perfume. And he goes on to say, a day of death is better than the day of birth. In other words, who you are as a person, your reputation, is more important than the awards that you receive in your life. That's pretty challenging in our culture. I mean, we think the guy on the stage is the guy to emulate. Not the guy who never gets recognition. We think the guy on the stage is who we should shape our lives after. And we love our celebrities. We love our celebrity Christians. And by the way, let me just tell you this. You say, when I said that, many of you might have said, I don't love celebrities. Actually, you do. Most of us do. Especially the ones who agree with us. And so our disdain towards the celebrities that don't disagree with us is usually matched by our emulation of those who do. And that's a dangerous place to be in, believe it or not. So reputation is more important than recognition. The second thing is this: reflection is better, or observation is better than ecstasy. What do you mean? Well, look at verse 2. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. In other words, it's better to observe and reflect and honor a life than it is to go and have another mindless party. This is interesting because Solomon spent many of his days feasting and hosting feasts. In fact, this event itself probably would have been at some type of feast where the book of Ecclesiastes was presented to people through oral or written essays. And so when Solomon says this, it's better to go to the house of mourning, he's like, it's better to observe a life that's been lived than to go and enjoy a party. He says, why? He said, because there's a reason in that. It'll make you think of yourself. It'll make you think of your own restrictions, your own finiteness, and your own potential reality as you yourself will one day face death. The third thing is reflection is better than release. Look at verse 3 and 4. Frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. Now that sounds weird, doesn't it? Look at verse 4. The heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. Solomon says this: it's better to think than to laugh. He's like, it's better to reflect on what is happening and give some thought to something than go and be entertained. And we're going to look at that because he's edging over. He's basically saying there's a way of life that considers yourself, considers others, and seeks to learn. And then there's a way of life that seeks to get recognition, that seeks to honor yourself, that seeks to have enjoyment and constant distractions. And he's like, and you need to choose between the two. He's really building on a lot of what he said in the book of Proverbs as well. Look at verse 5. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than listen to the song of fools. And my thought on that was this: it's better to learn than to be entertained. So much of our world right now is full of entertainment. Most of what we would even consider news outlets are not even particularly there for news. They're there to entertain. How do we know that? Well, listen and watch their ploys. I don't care if you watch Fox. I don't care if you watch CNN. I don't care if you watch NBC. I don't care if you watch your local station out of Jacksonville or Savannah or wherever it is that you're watching. What are they trying to get you to do? The number one thing they're trying to get you to do is come back tomorrow. Come at 11. Come tomorrow morning at 6. Come at 10. Come listen to this guest. Their goal is to entertain you. Not inform you, entertain you. Well, think about this. I read something a while back about, the average person doesn't read a book. It was like a certain percentage of people never read once they get out of high school or college. And I was just, flummoxed by this reality when we have such observations. I mean, you have YouTube videos you can watch. You can learn how to repair things. You can learn how to do different things. Many of you are being stretched in your understanding of technology over the last couple months. You've had to learn versus being entertained. It requires work. It requires effort. It requires watching someone else or reading what someone else says and then trying to apply it to your life. And Solomon says that kind of life is better than the life of being entertained. All right? And then the final thing is force is better than flashes. In other words, he just very quickly, he says, like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools is to his meaningless. The idea is that you throw thorns in and poof, they flare up. But immediately their energy is dispersed. There's nothing left. There's no force there. And Solomon is saying in our life, let's quit being attracted by the flashes. So let me finish very quickly in verses 7 through 10. And I'm just going to give you 4 quick thoughts on these verses. First of all, it's all about time. And in chapter 7 and verse 7, he says, extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Solomon says time is going to reveal a lot of things. And by the way, let's quit looking outward to see what time is revealing. Let's look inward and see what time is revealing in our hearts. Are we growing more like Jesus? Are we growing more forgiving, more accepting, more merciful, more gracious? Or are we growing more condemning? And the easy tendency is to say, well, those people out there, whoever those people may be to you, they are causing me to do this. No. Solomon has made it clear in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes that our choices are what's shaping our response. Okay? So, first thing we see is time will reveal many things. The second thing we see is patience. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Solomon says, wait. Be patient. Trust in God. That's the call there. And then verse 9, he points to this. He says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. The reality of it is this. If we understand how time is going to reveal things and we understand patience, and here's the thing, our anger is just going to dissipate. Because we don't need to lash out at these people. We don't need to lash out at those who oppose us. We don't need to lash out at those who think differently than us, because time is on our side. Time is on the side of the child of God. It always is. It always is. And then last thing, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. I just want to leave you with that challenging verse, because the tendency that we have is to say, well, back when such and such was happening, it was better. And it may have been better for you, but was it better for your neighbor? Was it better for countries across the world? Was it better for people that you've never met? And the challenge that Solomon is saying is this: if you look back and say the old days were better than this, he says, you're being unwise. You're making a comparison that you are not qualified to make. My 12-year-old self cannot compare to my 42-year-old self. Your 25-year-old self cannot compare to your 35-year-old self, and so on and so on and so on. And so we need to be careful. We need to trust in God and take His Word. Take the book of Ecclesiastes this week. Take your Bible and read through it. Mark it up and kind of notice the things that Solomon's making clear to us. Thank you. God bless you. I'll see you soon.